The weight that arrived before you could hold it. You didn't ask for the role. It was never announced. Nobody sat you down and said, "From this point forward, you are responsible. You are the one we are counting on." It just became true. Quietly. Gradually. And by the time you were old enough to notice it, it already felt like it had always been this way. Being the eldest child is one of the most psychologically complex positions a person can occupy in a family system. And the effects of that position reach further into adulthood, into careers, relationships, and the deepest layers of self-perception than most people ever fully trace back to their origin. Because it starts so early, before language, before memory, before there was any way to process what was being placed on you. The first child arrives into a world of two adults whose complete attention, anxiety, hope, and expectation is directed entirely at them. They are the experiment, the first attempt, the one on whom every parenting decision, cautious, anxious, and often overprotective, is first practiced. And then a sibling arrives, and the world reorganizes itself around that new presence. And the eldest child makes the first of many quiet adjustments, learning to need less, take up less space, be less of a burden. Learning, in the most foundational years of psychological development, that love is something you maintain through behavior rather than something you simply receive. The responsibility reflex. Ask an eldest child what happens when something goes wrong in a group, a project, a relationship, a situation involving other people. Almost universally, their first instinct is the same. What did I do wrong? What should I have caught? How is this mine to fix? This is what psychologists call the responsibility reflex. And in eldest children, it runs so deep and fires so automatically that most of them don't even recognize it as a learned response. They experience it as just who they are, but it was learned. Carefully and consistently through years of being the one who was held to a higher standard. The one who was old enough to know better. The one who was expected to set an example for the younger ones, even when they were only 2 or 3 years older and barely knew better themselves. Research consistently shows that firstborn children score higher on measures of conscientiousness and dutifulness than their later-born siblings. They take on more responsibility at work. They are more likely to be found in leadership positions. But there is a cost attached to that strength. The responsibility reflex doesn't come with an off switch. It applies everywhere, including places where it doesn't belong. In friendships where the eldest finds themselves managing everyone else's emotional state. In romantic relationships where they overfunction and wonder why they always feel alone in the work. In quiet moments where they cannot relax because some part of their brain is always scanning for what needs to be handled. The responsibility was never really theirs to carry alone. But nobody ever told them that. So they never stopped. Perfectionism as protection. For many eldest children, perfectionism arrives early and stays late. And it looks from the outside like ambition, like drive, like an admirable commitment to doing things well. But look at what's underneath it. Eldest children, especially those raised in environments where they were the benchmark, the standard bearer, the one who couldn't afford to fail without affecting how the whole family was perceived, learn very early that being good enough isn't quite enough. They learn that mistakes carry more weight for them than for their siblings, that expectations reset higher after every success, that approval is available, but conditionally, and only in response to performance. So the brain builds a system. If I do this perfectly, I am safe. If I do this perfectly, I am loved. If I do this perfectly, no one will be disappointed. Perfectionism, in this framework, is not a personality trait. It is a protection strategy. And like all protection strategies built in childhood, it doesn't retire when the childhood ends. It follows the person into adulthood, into careers where no achievement ever feels fully satisfying, into relationships where any criticism lands disproportionately hard, into a private inner world where the standard applied to themselves is one they would never dream of applying to anyone else. The perfectionistic eldest child is not trying to be impressive, they are trying to be safe. And the saddest part is, they've been safe for a long time now. They just don't quite believe it yet. The parentified child. In many families, and this happens across every background and culture, the eldest child becomes something beyond a sibling. They become a third parent. Sometimes this is explicit. They are asked to watch the younger ones, to manage them, to be responsible for them in ways that go beyond normal sibling interaction. But often it is subtler than that. They become the emotional support for a parent who is overwhelmed, the one who senses the tension in the household and adjusts their behavior to reduce it, the one who learns to read the adults in the room and manage the atmosphere, not because anyone asked them to, but because their nervous system learned that it was necessary. Psychologists call this parentification, and research is clear that it has significant long-term effects. Children who are parentified often grow into adults who are extraordinarily attuned to other people's emotional states. They read rooms with precision. They anticipate needs before they are expressed. They are often described as remarkably empathetic, deeply caring, and unusually mature. But they frequently have very little experience of being on the receiving end of that care. They are so practiced at attending to others that they often don't know how to let themselves be attended to. Being cared for feels uncomfortable. Being vulnerable feels like a failure of the role they've always played. And so they give and give and give, and privately wonder why they always feel so unseen. The achievement pressure loop. Studies going back decades have consistently found that firstborn children achieve at higher rates academically and professionally than their later-born siblings. They are disproportionately represented among CEOs, world leaders, and high-achieving professionals across almost every field. And this is often celebrated as evidence that birth order shapes destiny in positive ways. But here's what those statistics don't show. They don't show what it costs to be that person. The eldest child who achieves relentlessly is often not running toward success. They are running away from the terror of being the one who let everyone down, the one who had so much expected of them and somehow fell short, the one who was supposed to be the proof that the family worked and failed to provide it. Achievement for the eldest child is frequently tangled up with worth in a way that makes success feel like relief rather than joy. They reach the goal, and instead of celebrating, they immediately locate the next one, because stopping feels dangerous, because somewhere in the deepest circuitry of their psychology, they learned that their value was contingent on what they produced. Untangling achievement from worth is some of the most important psychological work an eldest child can do, not to become less driven, but to finally run towards something instead of away from it. The loneliness of the top. Here's the effect that eldest children almost never talk about. The loneliness. Not the ordinary kind of loneliness that comes from being alone. The specific, particular loneliness of always being the most responsible person in the room. Always the one who holds things together while other people fall apart. Always the one who manages the situation while others have the luxury of just experiencing it. Always the one who couldn't quite afford to need what everyone else was allowed to need. There's a particular grief in that, one that is hard to articulate and even harder to justify to yourself, because from the outside, your position looks like strength, like leadership, like admirable capability. Nobody tells you that it's lonely at the top of the sibling hierarchy. Nobody acknowledges that the role you were given, before you were old enough to choose it or reject it, came with a cost that nobody ever offered to share. And so many eldest children carry that loneliness in silence, convinced that needing something for themselves is a form of weakness they cannot afford. It isn't weakness, it's a need that was always legitimate and was simply never given permission to exist. The moment it all becomes a choice. And finally, this one matters most. Everything described in this video was shaped by a position you were born into, a role you were given before you had the language to accept or decline it. None of it was your fault. None of it was your choice. But here is where something powerful becomes available to you. Because at some point, and that point is different for everyone, the role stops being something that was placed on you and becomes something you are actively choosing to continue. The responsibility reflex can be noticed and interrupted. The perfectionism can be examined and gently loosened. The habit of giving everything and receiving nothing can be recognized as a pattern rather than an identity. Research on adult development consistently shows that birth order effects, real and significant as they are not destiny, they are a starting point. The eldest child, who understands what was placed on them, who can look at the weight they've been carrying and finally ask whether they still want to carry all of it. That person is at the beginning of something genuinely new, not a different person, the same person, but finally, for the first time, choosing on purpose. And that choice, made with full awareness of where it all came from, is one of the most profound forms of freedom available to a human being.